They say a woman's silence is golden. But mine was a graveyard, full of all the things I couldn't say. Hi, I'm Naomi, and I want to tell you about the day they laughed while I was breaking. Not strangers. Family, my sisters. My own blood. They didn't know I heard it. The joke, the laughter, the way they rolled my name around like it was some kind of warning to other women. But what they didn't know was, that same day, something inside me cracked, and that crack let the light in. Every Thanksgiving, I'd the same thing: green bean casserole and a fake smile. My sister Lauren had 4 kids under 7. My other sister, Chelsea, had just announced her second pregnancy with matching Big Brother shirts on her son. Everyone clapped, except me. I just smiled. Later that night, I was in the hallway, grabbing wine when I heard it. Chelsea, whispering loud enough to be heard. I swear Naomi's uterus is just decorative at this point. Laughter. My mom didn't correct her. Lauren didn't stop her. And I stood there, holding a bottle of Cabernet like it was going to keep me from falling apart. You want to know the worst part? I didn't cry. I was used to it. Jason never blamed me. He just got quieter. He'd kiss my forehead every morning. But somewhere in his silence, I could hear it. That ache. That wish that maybe we had tried just one more IVF cycle. We stopped trying 2 years ago. Too many losses, too many hopes handed to us in ultrasound rooms, and then ripped away behind surgical curtains. He never said he regretted it, but every time I caught him watching our neighbor's kid ride his bike, I wondered, would he leave if he met someone who could give him a child, and would I blame him if he did? We went to couples therapy once, just once. I cried in the parking lot. Before we even walked in, Jason held my hand, but we barely spoke during the session. The therapist asked, "What are you most afraid of?" I didn't say infertility. I said being forgotten. There were days I'd walk into Target and head straight to the baby aisle, not to buy anything, just to touch the onesies and breathe in that soft cotton scent. It was like a ritual. I'd imagine names, imagine the weight of a child asleep on my chest. Then I'd walk away before anyone noticed the tears. It was Chelsea's baby shower. I went because I'm the nice one. They played that game where you guess the number of diapers in the basket. Chelsea stood and said, "Naomi, wanna take a guess? I mean, when else will you be around this many baby things?" The laughter felt like shards. Even the pastor's wife giggled. You know, the kind, fake, tight-lipped, polite cruelty. I excused myself, said I had a migraine. But what I really had was heartbreak, and no more strength to keep pretending I was okay. There was a night I stood in the shower for over an hour, hot water full blast, trying to scald the sadness out of me. Jason knocked gently. "You okay?" he asked. I said nothing, because I didn't know the answer. He waited. He always waited. The thing about giving up is, you stop checking. I hadn't taken a test in over a year, but that morning I threw up while brushing my teeth. Twice. I thought it was the flu, but something told me, just look. 2 pink lines. I took another and another. Then I saw my OB, and she told me, "Naomi, there are 3 heartbeats. 3. I remember laughing, not because I thought it was funny, but because for the first time in years, God finally whispered back. I was admitted early, high risk. I spent weeks in a hospital bed, watching the world go by from a narrow window. Nurses became friends. Monitors became lullabies. Jason never missed a visit. He brought me books, snacks, and once, just to make me smile, a baby onesie that read, "Mommy's Little Miracle X3. When they handed me all 3, I didn't feel like a miracle. I felt like a woman who had finally exhaled. Chelsea brought flowers. Lauren brought guilt. My mom brought silence. But I didn't need apologies. I needed this weight in my arms, this rhythm of tiny heartbeats, this final loud answer to every cruel whisper I'd ever endured. They laughed while I was breaking, but now, I laugh because I survived. And if you've ever been mocked, underestimated, or pushed to the side, know this: your story isn't over. Your silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the quietest places. I used to think that once your miracle arrives, everything else falls into place, that people change, that pain softens, that the broken things in you stitch themselves whole again, without asking for permission. But that's not what happened. What happened was, I learned that healing doesn't erase what hurt you. It just teaches you how to carry it differently. I was sitting on the floor of the nursery one night, Eden cradled against my chest, Hope curled into my side, and Elijah fussing in his bassinet. The moonlight spilled through the window like a secret, and I remember whispering, "Please don't grow up hating silence the way I did." Jason had gone quiet again, not distant, just quiet, like the weight of fatherhood was louder than anything he could say. He worked late, a lot, said the noise of the house got too much sometimes, and I understood. I really did. But part of me worried, not about him leaving, but about him staying and slowly fading inside the life we fought so hard to have. One night, I asked him, "Are you happy?" He looked at me like I'd asked something foreign, and then he said, "I'm trying to remember what happy feels like." That night, I rocked all three babies alone until my arms ached, my spine bent. But I didn't put them down. I was afraid that if I let go, everything would unravel. A month later, Chelsea invited me to speak at her church group, some kind of women's night, testimonies, worship, that sort of thing. I nearly laughed. Me, speak? The same Naomi who used to lie about headaches just to avoid baby showers. But I went, and I stood in a room full of women, with eyes that looked like mine, tired, heavy, holding back things they couldn't name. I didn't preach, I just told the truth. I told them about the silence, the hurt, the Cabernet in the hallway, the ultrasound rooms that went quiet too fast. I told them how I almost gave up, and then I told them about 3 heartbeats. Afterward, a woman hugged me so tight I could feel her heart break. She whispered, "I buried my 4th miscarriage last week," and I whispered back, "Then you're still standing on sacred ground." That night, something shifted, not for the crowd, for me. I realized my voice didn't have to be loud to be powerful. It just had to be honest. And so I started writing, late at night, during feedings, in between diaper changes and midnight bottle. I started telling my story on blogs, on podcasts, in small groups. People started listening, not because I was extraordinary, but because I was real. But here's the thing about rising. You start to see who's still rooting for you and who's just waiting for you to fall again. Lauren became distant. She said I was making it all about me. Mom said I needed to be more private, that I was airing our family's shame. But it wasn't shame I was airing, it was truth. Raw, unfiltered, unpretty truth. And if that made people uncomfortable, then maybe they needed to sit with their own silence for a while. One afternoon, Chelsea called me in tears. Her baby, Rose, wasn't hitting milestones. The doctors were concerned, and for the first time, I was the one comforting her. I sat on the phone with her for 2 hours, listening, reminding, holding space, and it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like redemption, like the circle was closing in a way that didn't leave either of us out. Around that time, Jason's father got sick, pancreatic cancer, fast, brutal. We flew to Michigan and stayed in his childhood home. Jason, the babies and me, in a tiny guest room, with peeling wallpaper and the smell of old grief. Watching him with his dad, watching a grown man become a boy in the face of goodbye broke something in me. Not the kind of break that weakens, the kind that opens. Jason cried in my lap for the first time in years, and I held him like I hold our babies, firm, but gentle, like I was afraid he'd slip through the cracks if I wasn't careful. After the funeral, Jason looked at me differently, less like a wife, more like a home. He started waking with the babies again, started cooking again. We took the triplets on stroller walks around the lake. One day, while Hope giggled at ducks and Elijah smeared applesauce across his face, he turned to me and said, "I think I remember what happy feels like." I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because for once, it didn't have to be. Then came the letter, a thick envelope with my name, written in sharp cursive, from my mother. Inside was a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Me, 5 years old, clutching a baby doll, smiling, like the world hadn't yet bruised me. And on the back, just one line in shaky handwriting: "You always knew how to love what you didn't yet have." No apology, but something close, a bridge, maybe, or the start of one. Months passed, the babies turned 1. We threw a party in our backyard, small, messy, perfect. Lauren came, Chelsea brought cupcakes again. Mom held Eden like she was holding something delicate and holy. And for a moment, I let myself breathe, really breathe, not waiting for the next wound, not scanning for the next betrayal. Just here, now, alive. That night, after everyone left, I stood in the doorway of their nursery again, Jason behind me, the babies asleep, and I whispered, "I think I'm ready," he said. "For what?" I turned, looked him in the eyes. "To forgive them, for real this time." He nodded. "And yourself?" I paused. That one was harder. But I said, "Yeah, I think her too, because sometimes survival isn't loud, it's quiet, it's soft, it's the sound of your own breath when no one is listening. It's 3 heartbeats that were never supposed to be. It's a woman, once mocked, now made whole. And if you're still in your silent season, still holding grief like it's your only companion, let me be the one to tell you your miracle isn't just coming. It's already waking up inside you, stretching, growing, whispering, 'I'm here.'" They laughed while I was breaking, but now I laugh. Because I rose, because I spoke, because I stayed, and maybe, just maybe, because I finally learned that the graveyard of my silence wasn't just where things ended, it's where they began. And somewhere out there, there's a woman pressing play on this video with tears she hasn't let fall in weeks. If that's you, stay, let them fall. You're not weak, you're just watering the next chapter. It wasn't until the triplets turned 18 months that I realized something had changed in me. Not just the kind of change that comes from surviving trauma, or motherhood, or being laughed at and proving them wrong. No, this was deeper, quieter, the kind of shift that sneaks up on you during the most ordinary moments, like watching Elijah stack blocks, or Hope babble at shadows, or Eden fall asleep mid-sentence with her fist curled around my thumb. I'd spent so long clawing toward wholeness that I never expected peace to arrive so still, like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. But peace is a funny thing. It doesn't last without being tested. Jason got a call on a Tuesday morning. I was spoon-feeding the baby's mashed banana when I heard his voice go flat in the hallway. A cousin, car accident, a child involved. He didn't cry. He just walked back into the kitchen and said, "I need to go to Atlanta." I nodded. "For how long?" "I don't know," he said. 3 days turned into 7. Then at night, I'd rock Eden while staring at the digital clock, its blinking call-in taunting me. I tried not to spiral, but every unanswered call, every late reply, felt like a thread unraveling. Then I made the mistake of scrolling through his tagged photos. It wasn't that he was with someone, he wasn't, but he looked light, free, like a man unburdened, and I hated myself for the envy that bubbled in my throat. Because here I was, in the trenches of motherhood and recovery and family drama, while he was catching his breath in another state. He called one night, finally said, "I think I just needed space." I didn't realize how suffocated I felt. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, "Come home when you're ready to choose us again." That night, I lay in bed with all three babies in my arms, my body aching, my spirit humming, not breaking, not crumbling, just humming with a strange, unfamiliar strength, because I finally knew that even if he didn't come back, I would be okay. That terrified me, and it also freed me. 2 weeks later, Jason walked back through the door with a look in his eyes I couldn't quite read. He didn't say anything. He just knelt on the floor, pulled the babies into his arms, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then to me, I didn't know how hard it hit me until I saw how easy it was for me to walk away. I looked at him and said, "It wasn't easy. You're just used to escaping when things get real, but you don't get to run from this version of me." And for once, he didn't try to defend himself. He just nodded. Life after that wasn't a perfect montage. There were still long nights, still messy mornings, but something had shifted again. This time between us. He started doing the 2 a.m. feedings without being asked. He stopped using work as an excuse. He started seeing me again, not as the broken woman he married, but as the woman I'd become. And yet, something inside me still ate, a shadow I couldn't quite name. It started as dreams, not nightmares, just echoes. I'd hear my own voice crying in places I didn't recognize. Sometimes I'd see a version of myself, pregnant and glowing, only to watch her fade into dust. I started journaling, not for clarity, just for survival. Words spilled out of me like water from a cracked dam. Things I never said out loud. How I'd once held a bottle of sleeping pills and wondered what would happen if I just disappeared. How I'd screamed into pillows until my throat bled. How I used to walk past cemeteries and wonder if any of the babies I'd lost were buried somewhere like that. It wasn't until I reread those pages that I realized what was happening. Grief doesn't always come when the casket closes. Sometimes it waits, hides in the corners of joy, resurfaces when you're finally calm enough to feel it. And I had spent so long surviving, I forgot to mourn. So I started therapy again. Not for my marriage, not for my children, for me, just me. I sat on that same couch with the same therapist, years older, infinitely heavier, and finally ready. She asked, "Why are you here today?" And I said, "Because I don't want to raise my children in a house haunted by a ghost version of their mother." The work was slow, ugly. I learned how to sit in my pain without trying to dress it up in productivity. I stopped smiling when I didn't mean it. I learned how to say, "That hurt me," without apologizing for being sensitive. I learned how to ask Jason for what I needed, and I learned how to hold space for his healing too. Somewhere along the way, I found myself again. Not the old Naomi, not the woman trying to earn love or outrun loneliness. A new version. One who knew her worth even when no one was clapping. One who didn't flinch at baby shower invites. One who started hosting small gatherings at her house and didn't apologize for the toys on the floor or the unfinished laundry. And then, one day, I got a call that threatened to unravel it all. It was my mother, breathless. "It's your father," she said. "He's in the hospital." My father, the man who hadn't spoken to me in 6 years, who walked out when I was 23 because I married Jason against his wishes, who once told me that some women were meant to be mothers and others were just placeholders. I didn't know what to feel, but I packed the babies into the car, left Jason a note, and drove 3 hours to the hospital in silence. When I walked into that sterile room, I expected resentment, but what I saw was a man smaller than I remembered, oxygen tubes, pale skin, and eyes that no longer held judgment, just exhaustion. He looked at me and whispered, "You came." I nodded. "Of course I did. I didn't deserve that," he said. "No," I replied. "But I didn't come for you, I came for me." And then, after a pause, "You're still my father." Whether I like it or not. He smiled faintly. You look like your mother. And then he fell asleep. I sat in that chair for 4 hours, watching his chest rise and fall, and somewhere between those beeps and that cold hospital air, I forgave him, not because he earned it, but because I refused to carry his silence any longer. When I got home, Jason was on the porch with the babies in his lap. How was it? He asked. Hard, I said, but necessary. And that's when it hit me. Maybe healing doesn't always feel like victory. Maybe it feels like choosing softness in the places you were taught to harden. Maybe it's letting your children fall asleep on your chest without wondering if you're enough. Maybe it's walking back into the fire, not to get burned again, but to prove to yourself that you can survive the heat and come out still whole. And maybe, just maybe, it's realizing that the version of you they mocked, belittled, ignored, she was never broken. She was just waiting for you to believe in her again. Of course, here's the continuation of Naomi's story, seamlessly picking up from where the last part ended, in the same cinematic, suspenseful, emotional first-person voice. This continues the journey toward the full 10,000-word expansion. I used to think survival was the goal, that if I could just make it through the hardest parts, through infertility, through betrayal, through the loneliness that claws at your ribs in the middle of a crowded room, then I'd arrive at peace, finally and fully. But what I've learned is that survival isn't a destination, it's a threshold. And beyond that, that's where the real work begins. It was a Wednesday, the babies were napping. I was standing in the kitchen reheating coffee I'd already forgotten twice, when I heard the knock. 3 short raps. I opened the door, and there she was, Lauren, holding a small box, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept. She didn't say hello, she just looked at me and whispered, I need to tell you something. She stepped inside, her arms stiff, her presence like a ghost that had finally stopped pretending to be alive. She handed me the box. I opened it, and inside was a stack of letters, some sealed, others torn at the edges. I found them in Mom's attic, she said. They're all addressed to you. I stared at them like they were ticking. From who? I asked. Dad, she said. I didn't move. I couldn't. My father, the man who spent a decade being nothing more than an echo in my mother's bitterness, had written me, not once, not twice, dozens of times. I sat on the couch and started reading, one by one. The first one was from the night of my wedding. He'd written, I should have been there. I watched your vows on a neighbor's phone. You looked radiant, like your mother when she still believed in soft things. Every letter bled, regret, anger, love. He didn't know how to say out loud. He said he kept writing, even when I never wrote back. Said he gave them to Mom to mail, but never followed up. I looked at Lauren. Why now? She said nothing, just cried. And that silence told me everything she'd known, maybe not about the letters, but about the cruelty, about the alliances formed in whisper, about the way our family turned grief into a quiet contest. And I was always the one losing. I didn't yell, I didn't break anything. I just held those letters like they were bones of a history I hadn't known belonged to me. And then I said the one thing that had been pressing on my chest since I first lost my voice in that hallway on Thanksgiving. Why didn't anyone stand up for me? Lauren fell apart, because if we had, we would have had to look at our own shame. And there it was, truth, ugly, and free. That night, after the babies were asleep, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter of my own, not to my father, not to Lauren, to the Naomi who stayed quiet in that hallway, the Naomi who believed she was just a failed womb in a sea of fertile sisters. I told her, you were never empty, you were preparing. And then I burned it in a metal bowl outside, letting the ashes float into the same sky I used to beg for answers. And then, just when I thought the dust had settled, my phone buzzed with a message that stopped my breath. Chelsea's in the ER, something with her heart. I was in the car before Jason could finish asking what was wrong. The hospital was 15 minutes away. Every light felt like a curse. I replayed every moment I hadn't called her back, every time I'd let distance win over connection. When I got there, she was stable, but pale, hooked up to wires that made her look smaller than I remembered. She smiled weakly. Still think I'm invincible? I sat beside her and took her hand. What happened? I asked. She looked away. Stress, anxiety, the doctor said. I've been ignoring the signs for years. And then, softer, I've been so busy pretending I had it all together, I didn't realize I was falling apart. We talked for hours about motherhood, about grief, about the way shame molds itself into sarcasm and cruelty. She said, I hated how strong you were. It made me feel like I had no excuse to fall apart. I said, I was never strong. I was just too afraid to stop moving. We cried together, really cried. The kind of tears that come from wounds you forgot were still open. She came home the next day, changed, quieter, more present. We started talking weekly, sharing recipes, sending each other ridiculous memes about sleep-deprived moms. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And then came the call from the podcast producer. I'd written a guest piece for a blog, a small one, about silence, about healing, about grief that doesn't have funerals. A producer had read it, wanted me to come on and tell my story. I almost said no, but Jason said, maybe someone out there needs to hear it the way you needed to say it. So I did, nervously, quietly, but honestly. And it went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. Women messaged me from all over the country, mothers, widows, daughters, people who had been mocked in kitchens and silenced at family tables. They said, you made me feel seen, and I realized I didn't need a platform. I already had one. My life, my pain, my healing, that was the platform. That was the altar. Offers started rolling in, speaking gigs, a book proposal, but I didn't say yes to any of them. Not yet, because something told me this part of the story wasn't finished. And I was right, because one morning, Elijah didn't wake up the way he usually did. He was warm, breathing, but quiet, limp. Jason and I rushed to the ER. Words like testing, infection, and concern blurred around us like stat. I sat in the corner of the room while they poked and scanned and whispered. I held his sock in my hand and begged, God, not now, not after everything. He stabilized, a rare virus. Watch and wait, monitor at home. And in that sleepless week, I saw something in Jason's eyes I hadn't seen since the day we got married. Terror, the kind that reminds you how little control you really have. When Elijah recovered fully, we held each other and wept, not just for what almost happened, but for everything we hadn't yet said. I told him, if we ever lose one of them, I won't survive it, he said. You will, but I won't let you find out. And for the first time, I believed him, because surviving is one thing, but living after loss, that's a rebellion. And I wasn't done rebelling. I used to think the scariest part of my story was the silence, but it wasn't. It was what came after. After the babies, after the apologies, after the healing. Because what no one tells you is that peace can be just as unsettling as chaos when you've lived in survival mode for so long. It started with a letter. Again, but this one wasn't from my father or my mother or even my sisters. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just my name, written in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper, on it, a hospital logo I hadn't seen in years, and beneath it, a name, mine, a date, a record number, and one chilling line. One embryo remains in cryopreservation, authorization for destruction pending. My breath stopped. I stared at the paper like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. But it didn't. It stayed there, screaming, without sound. One embryo, frozen, forgotten. A leftover hope from the cycles that broke me. I hadn't known. I thought they were all used, all gone, all mourned. I sat on the floor, knees to chest. As the room tilted around me, Jason came in, saw my face, and didn't ask. He just sat beside me, shoulder to shoulder, hand on mine. When I finally told him, he didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I didn't know. Because how do you decide the fate of a maybe? How do you look at the face of 3 living miracles and still ache for the ghost of the 4th? For days, I walked through the house like a stranger. I held my children tighter, watched their faces closer, tried to convince myself that I was whole, that nothing was missing. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw a child I'd never met. I called the clinic, asked for the records, confirmed it was ours. 1 embryo, healthy, viable, 11 years frozen, 11 years waiting. That night, I stood in the doorway of the nursery again, just like I had so many times before. Only this time, I didn't feel strong. I felt torn, splintered, like my heart was being asked to stretch in directions it didn't know how to go. Jason found me there, arms crossed, eyes wide. I asked him, what if that was meant to be our child too? He took a long breath and said, then maybe we're being given one more chance to listen. I didn't sleep. I prayed. I begged. I bargained. I screamed into pillows like I used to, because this wasn't just science. This wasn't just cells. This was a soul that never got its turn. And deep down, I knew I couldn't let them destroy what I once asked heaven for. So we decided. We signed the forms. Not for destruction, but for transfer. The doctors warned us. I was older now, riskier, complicated. But I didn't care. I needed to know. Needed to try. Needed to say I gave everything I had. The transfer day was quiet. Jason held my hand, tighter than he ever had before. The room was sterile, soft music played, and in one surreal moment, I watched them place what was once a dream, and now a chance, back into the place it came from. And then we waited. The days were long, the nights longer. I tried not to hope too loudly, tried not to imagine a nursery, or a name or a future, and then a faint line, then another, then blood work, then numbers that rose. It was happening again, one more time. I was pregnant. The news knocked the wind out of me, but something felt different. The joy was there, but so was the fear, the knowing, the knowledge of what can be gained and lost in the same breath. Every scan, I held my breath. Every heartbeat, I cried. And at 11 weeks, the doctor looked at me and frowned. I froze. What is it? I asked. She smiled. It's a girl. I laughed. Jason cried. But then she added, and I want to show you something else. She turned the screen, adjusted the probe, and then there it was. Another flicker, another rhythm, another heartbeat. Twins. Again, I stared at the screen. My mouth didn't work. My brain didn't compute. But it was 1 embryo. I whispered. She nodded. Identical twins. It split. Naturally. It happens sometimes. 2 babies, 2 heartbeats, 1 last embryo, the same embryo we almost destroyed. The months passed in a blur of ultrasounds and high-risk appointments. I told no one but Jason, not my sisters, not my mother, not the internet. I needed this one to be ours. Quiet, protected. The birth was hard, complicated. I lost more blood than they liked. I drifted in and out. But I remember one moment, clear as day. The nurse placed them on my chest, one after the other, tiny, crying, alive, and I said their names out loud. For the first time, Grace and Mercy, because that's what they were. Not additions, not surprises. They were the redemption arc I didn't see coming. We brought them home in the spring. The house smelled like bottles, and flowers, and faint baby powder. The older 3 hovered around the bassinets, protective and proud. Jason stood at the doorway, arms folded, eyes wide. We did it again, he said. I nodded. No, we finished the story, but that's not the jaw drop, is it? You want the twist, the part that made me sit down, hand to my chest, breath stolen. It came in the mail, again. A small white envelope, same clinic, but this time, inside was a letter. Not from a billing department or a lab, it was handwritten, from a nurse. She said she'd been there 11 years ago, during one of our IVF rounds, that she remembered me, remembered how I held Jason's hand through every injection, every loss. She said she wasn't supposed to write, but she couldn't hold it in anymore, and then she wrote, "When you and your husband had your final cycle, we had an issue with storage. It was brief, just a power flicker, but something strange happened. The records showed you had one embryo remaining, but when we checked the storage tank, there were two." My eyes blurred. I read it again. "Two," she continued. "We tested them, both viable, both identical. We didn't understand it. No one could explain it, but we stored them anyway. We listed it as one embryo, split in storage, because that was the only logical explanation." I dropped the letter. My hands shook. Jason picked it up and read it too. His mouth opened, then closed. He sat down on the edge of the crib, staring at our two new daughters, and I said it out loud, barely a whisper. "They were never split in me, because they didn't split in the womb. They split in the dark, in the cold, in the silence. Two hearts, born from one impossible thread, and the thing they almost threw away became the very miracle that multiplied in defiance." They laughed while I was breaking. Now I laugh, because I carry the impossible, because grace and mercy didn't just survive. They arrived, uninvited, by man, unexplainable by science, unstoppable by grief. And now I tell my story because someone somewhere is standing in their own silence. Because sometimes the last breath of hope becomes the loudest proof that God never needed permission to do the impossible. And sometimes the one they counted out, she becomes the one who carries the whole world forward. If this story touched you in any way, don't leave without joining this community. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remind each other that pain doesn't have the final word. Thank you for watching.